Selamat petang. So hari ni kita akan masuk kepada bab 2 akhirnya. So bab 2 ni kita akan fokus kepada falsafah hidup lah. Bab pertama kita dah belajar sebelum ni kan, theoretical, practical. So theoretical ni teori falsafah, practical ni apa yang kita apply. Teori ni lebih kepada macam teori apa contohnya kita boleh bagi ataupun dalam bahasa Arab ini nazariyah lah. So maksudnya ilmu kewujudan, metafizik semua tu kita masuk dalam teori. Praktikal ni akhlak lah, lebih kepada macam mana aktiviti menghayati ilmu tentang manusia, tentang Tuhan. Okey. Lepas tu kita ada falsafah baru seperti alam sekitar dan falsafah bidang. Contohnya psikologi, semua tu lah. So kita akan masuk bab-bab ni kejap lagi. Okey. So, kita dalam falsafah teoretikal kita dah belajar dah sebenarnya chapter 1 hari tu kan. Kita ada epistemologi, metaphysics, logic, psikologi. So, kita akan belajar satu-satu lah. Psikologi ni adalah kita cuma nak fokus on konsep insan. So dalam kitab Ghazali dia tanya mahwa insan, apa itu insan kan? Konsep insan seimbang metafizik dan konsep insan potensi individu. Maksudnya orang tu dia bukan saja berjaya sebagai manusia yang maksudnya dari segi fizikalnya dia seorang yang capai semua apa, macam kalau kita sekarang kita ada benchmark kan. Mungkin seorang tu educated, successful in dia punya career, dia bukan capai tu sahaja, tapi dia juga ada maksudnya perkembangan emosi, rohani, intelek. Dia seorang yang dia apa tu kata dia seorang yang ada conscience ni hati nurani yang macam bagi tahu dia this is right, this is wrong. Dia ada etika, dia seorang yang rajin. So perkara-perkara ni semua akan itu adalah apa yang membentuk seorang insan. Kalau dia cuma seorang yang successful sahaja dari segi kerja, tapi dia bukan seorang yang baik, dia belum lagi menjadi insan. Maksudnya dia seorang successful segi kerja, tapi macam it's like I do anything untuk berjaya. So and justified means. So jadi itu dia belum lagi mencapai sebagai taraf sebagai insan. Okey. So, asal-usul insan ni pelbagai fahaman dan pendekatan lah. Jadi, hakikat dia ada fizikal dan rohani. Some people are very strong physically, tapi rohani dia kurang. Some people are very strong rohani, tapi dari segi fizikal dia kurang. Tapi sebenarnya it's the whole rohani inside yang move the physical. So, kalau inside is okay, outside is insyaAllah okay. Okay. So, falsafah konsep sejahtera ni, sejahtera, dia membangunkan ekonomi, pula dah. Membangunkan rohani dan emosi. Okay. So, rohani ni is spiritual. Spiritually macam spiritual not really sebenarnya religious. You can be somebody yang very macam you believe in tak semestinya you believe in God lah. You believe in energy. Kalau you believe things like that, itu pun dah kira sebagai seorang yang spiritual. So rohani dan emosi. Emosi ni maksudnya you faham lah, you tahu macam sekarang ni kan, you tengok ada certain students yang cakap aku selama je belah WhatsApp group cikgu. I mean perhaps the student is a very good student, kita tak tahu, maybe dia score kan, tapi dia dari segi emosi dia bukan seorang yang well developed lagi. Sebab apa? Sebab dia tak memikirkan perasaan cikgu dia. Kan? Ataupun cikgu yang nampak student yang tak berapa pandai dan cikgu tu kata kau ni bodoh lah. Dan cikgu tu pun belum develop lagi. That is a very big problem lah kalau cikgu belum develop kan. So menyedari dan insafi karya pencipta. Ini antara benda-benda yang kita hargai. So maksudnya kita hargai dunia ni kan. Kita hargai apa yang Allah ciptakan, Tuhan ciptakan, apa saja, whatever your God is kan, kita hargai. So bila kita tahu hargai, kita tak akan macam merosakkan kehidupan, maksudnya hidupan ni kita akan lebih menjaga benda-benda ni sebab kita hargai orang bagi kita. Okey. Pembangunan insan ni adalah proses mendidik manusia secara seimbang dan holistik. So manusia ni maksudnya dia bukan saja bijak dari segi education, dia mesti bijak dari segi emosi, dari segi cara pergaulan, dia tahu macam mana nak bergaul dengan orang. Okey. So dia ada akal. So bila akal untuk potensi untuk pembelajaran ni sangat tinggi lah. So kita ada akal kan. Sedangkan kucing pun kita boleh train, anjing pun kita boleh train, binatang tu dia tak ada akal, kita boleh train dia. Ini pula manusia. Tapi kalau manusia bersifat macam dia nak buat apa dia buat walaupun dia train, jadi dia adalah sama level dengan binatang, dia belum insan. Okay, so kita discuss psychologically. Psikologi ni adalah ilmu yang membahaskan kelakuan, kecenderungan akal fikiran, perbahasan ilmu jiwa, akal, perasaan, ingatan, hayalan, tabiat, ekspresi dan lain-lain. So dia lebih kepada roh dan hakikat. Atau adakah itu jisim atau unsur yang bukan jisim? Apakah hubungan roh dengan jisim? Roh ni is your spirit. Dengan jisim ni is your body, badan. Okay. So jadi apa kesan roh ni kepada badan? Ataupun your soul, apa kesan your soul kepada badan? You have evil soul, so badan you akan buat benda-benda baik. Kan? Kalau you ialah maksudnya you action you lakukan dengan fizikal dengan badan you. Tapi kalau you seorang yang jahat, adakah fizikal you akan buat benda-benda baik? So soul you kena baik dulu. Okay. So dia sekarang ni adalah untuk memahami manusia, psikologi. So kena fikir kenapa dia, why is this person like this? So sebenarnya macam ni. Aplikasi prosedur dan pendekatan saintifik. So maksudnya observation lah. So kalau you belajar psikologi ni, kalau ada sesiapa yang major psikologi ke, psychiatry ke, you kena pergi observe people who have mental illness or people who have problems kan. So dalam psikologi ada dua aliran yang kita akan fokus lah. Satu free will. Free will ni is like dan secondly estetika. Okay. Free will ni adalah sebenarnya manusia ni semua macam buat apa-apa ikut suka kita lah. Kalau kita tak nak buat, dan tak ada siapa boleh paksa kita. Itu konsep free will. Tapi dalam ada pula orang kata free will sebenarnya tak ada. Determinism ni adalah macam kat sebab ni masyarakat yang macam ni. Kenapa you pergi masuk universiti? Sebab masyarakat dah ditetapkan. Lepas you belajar habis sekolah menengah, you kena belajar masuk universiti, baru you dikategorikan sebagai orang yang berpelajaran ataupun berjaya. Jadi you buat tu bukan sebab you nak buat, you buat sebab adalah desakan masyarakat. Kenapa orang pakai tudung? Sebab itu adalah desakan masyarakat memaksa dia pakai tudung. Macam itulah lebih kurang. Okay, so intrinsik ada diri sendiri yang nak buat, ataupun extrinsic adalah faktor luaran. It depends dalam determinism. Estetika pula sebenarnya datang daripada perkataan kepekaan. Tapi kalau sekarang ni kita guna estetika as benda kecantikan. Okay, nilai-nilai kecantikan. Okay. So, estetika juga boleh diertikan sebagai persepsi panca indera, sense of perception. Okay. Alexander Baumgarten membawa maksud estetika menilai dan merasa serta menghayati sesuatu yang mendalam. So, maksudnya sesuatu yang maksudnya kita hayati je sebab dia cantik. Cantik ni doesn't mean that cantik di mata. Mungkin juga cantik di dalam bentuk spiritual dia, benda tu cantik. Okay. So dia salah satu cabang sebagai apa, isu psikik diri sebagai inferior faculty. Pengamatan yang sensual itu bukan sahaja dapat sebab menyuruh tahu berada dalam keadaan intensif dan ekstensif. Maksudnya macam ni. Ni kalau benda tu cantik, kita tengok sampai ada efek kita macam kita pergi dekat tepi laut. Kita tengok laut tu, betul kita rasa tenang, kita rasa happy, kita rasa macam okay, it's beautiful. So dia macam kita panggil inferior faculty lah, mata yang melihat kan. So bila mata tu melihat, kita tak fikir, kita just tengok dan kita rasa cantik. So it's very inferior way of philosophy. Okay. So it's aesthetic kita panggil. So ini antara cabang-cabang falsafah juga. So bersifat dia bersifat menyeluruh. Dia tengok semua dan dia rasa dia happy. Okay. Bahagian yang kedua kita belajar ialah metafizik. Last few class I think I dah explain metafizik ni apa. Something that is not physical. You tak boleh rasa kan. Lepas tu okay, sistem kepercayaan konsep insan ni, Tuhan dan kewujudannya, dan monotheism, theism, atheism, agnosticism, theism, atheism dan agnosticism. Nanti kita akan define lah benda-benda ni. Okay, matlamat hidup. Satu falsafah hidup, matlamat hidup. As human being, what is falsafah hidup you? So, you bukan kucing ke anjing ke makan berak tidur. Okay? So, as long as their needs are fulfilled, dia tak payah fikir. Kita instan. So, kita higher lagi. Kita punya need ada tinggi lagi daripada ni. Okay. So, kita ada kosmologi, ekologi, hubungan manusia dengan alam. And then kita ada hubungan insan dengan Tuhan. Kemudian sistem metafizik, ni semualah monotheism, polytheism, deism, apa semua tu kita akan discuss sekejap lagi. Dan metafizik untuk kemajuan ilmu. Satu cabang falsafah yang bermula dari zaman Greek. Daripada orang datang, kenapa kita kat sini? Kat mana destinasi akhir kita? This is a very, why are we here? Inilah sebabnya kita ada filosofi kan. Kenapa kita wujud? So, first philosophy, first science, first theology, semua cakap this is why we have. Okay. Meta, melepasi bebas. Meta is basically unsur bebas. So, metafizik meaning physically bebas lah. Maksudnya it's not bonded, tak terikat dengan tubuh ataupun jisim. Mana kita ada Tuhan je. Tuhan ni higher being yang macam kita tak boleh, walaupun kita gambarkan dia dalam bentuk patung ke apa untuk serta-serta agama, kita still tak boleh touch. Kan? Tujuan kajian metafizik adalah untuk mendapatkan kejelasan pemikiran konsep itu. So ada dia macam banyak discussion lah pasal ontologi kewujudan. I discuss. Kalau you tak faham, you boleh tengok last class punya lecture. Okay. Dua elemen metafizik berunsur kajian, paling abstrak atau paling umum, selalunya fenomena alam, then keagamaan, syurga, neraka, hidup mati. This will be discussing the last couple of weeks. Betul tak? Scholasticism, Islamic philosophy. Okay. Ontologi ni teori hakikat. So, sebab-sebab causality dan kosmogoni, asal-usul alam. Okay. Kosmologi, fenomena alam semesta. Okay. Lepas tu, kita ada subjek, predikat dan taksonomi. Kewajipan, necessity dan kemungkinan, contingency. Okay. Minda dan jirim. Mind over matter. If the mind don't mind, then it doesn't matter. Kan dia cakap macam tu, kita akan belajar benda tu. Kehendak, free will dan ketentuan, determinism. Okay. Epistemologi. So, this sebenarnya basically apakah kebenaran? What is the truth? There is no truth. If you study philosophy deeper, there is no truth. Okay, and then perolehan ilmu ni kaedah perolehan. Macam how do you get knowledge? Daripada mana dapat knowledge? Okay, bagaimanakah kita mengetahui? How do you know? Macam mana kita tahu ni adalah ilmu? Okay, and then jenis dan klasifikasi ilmu. Apa jenis ilmu? Okay. Perkembangan epistemologi ni, kesan dia terhadap kehidupan. First, kita ada scientific revolution lah, definitely. And then kita dapat ilmu daripada rationalism, empirism, skepticism, wahyu, apa semua-semua tu lah. Teori tentang kebenaran. Kita dapat teori yang correspondent, yang coherent, yang pragmatic. Okay. So, dia sebenarnya epistemologi ni adalah kegunaan dia lah untuk sintesis. Sintesis ni maksudnya gabungkan semua ilmu. Macam contohnya ilmu agama dengan ilmu sains ke, itu kita panggil epistemologi. So, di dalam dunia sekarang itulah kegunaan dia. Okay. So dia datang daripada perkataan episteme, Greek. Okay. Atau dialogi yang bermaksud kajian. So kajian tentang ilmu, basically macam mana kita tahu itu ilmu. Okay. Kita dah bincang apa itu kita panggil tadi epistemologi. Itu apa? Kajian tentang sumber ilmu. Sekarang sumber ilmu tu apa? Okey, sumber ilmu tu dia ada a priori, ilmu didapati tanpa penakulan dan pengalaman terdahulu. It's not without experience. Maksudnya, contohnya you come to class and you learn mathematics. You learn numbers, you tak ada pengalaman pun, you boleh belajar. Okay, and then posterior. Ilmu yang didapati daripada pengalaman atau sesuatu yang tidak terpisah daripadanya. So maksudnya you have to have experience baru you tahu. Contohnya when you date a boy, mula-mula tak tahu this is playboy. This is playgirl. But as you get older, something wrong dia ni. Kita terus rasa, betul tak? So that is considered posterior. Posteriori. Priori ni untuk ilmu dunia je, untuk ilmu kehidupan you need to posteriori. Okay? Okay. So, kesan epistemologi ni so we can see something yang possible and tak possible dalam knowledge you. Something yang you kata you belajar. Sometimes orang claim, suka ambil medical kan. Orang claim, apa dia orang suka claim ni, apa vaksin ni menyebabkan penyakit bla 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 bla. Sekarang dah kena corona, COVID-19 ni tak ada vaksin macam mana? Then why don't these people go and volunteer, do whatever they do lah, kan? Tak juga, tak buat juga, kan? Perlu mengetahui ada objek yang kurang manfaat dan mudarat. Tak perlu diketahui meskipun mungkin diketahui. Certain things are better left untold. Kita tak tahu tak apa juga, better dah tahu daripada tahu. Certain things kalau you tahu pun macam dia akan membuatkan you pening. So tak payah tahu. Okay, epistemologi menentukan kemajuan sains dan teknologi. Okay, dan hakikat dan pengetahuan kebenaran dan kepastian. Hakikat dan kehendak kebebasan manusia. So maksudnya hakikat ke pengetahuan je lah. It's kita tahu apa yang kita tahu dan kita tahu apa kita tak tahu. Basically it's like that lah. And then kita akan belajar logik. Okay, induktif ataupun aruhan. Aruhan ya, ini I learn a new Malay. Lepas tu dia falasi. Falasi ni kepalsuan. Contohnya orang macam tadi vaksin kan. Vaksin menyebabkan sakit bla bla bla. Itu falasi. You tak ada proof. Okay. And then kaedah lain, contoh simbolik, linguistik, ilham, abduksi, dialog, inquiry, falsafah. Deduktif adalah ataupun deduction. Lepas tu intuitif. Semua ni kita akan bincang sekejap lagi dalam satu-satu bab. Okay. So, peranan logik dan pencegahan fallacy. Fallacy ni salahan berfikir lah. You got that is a very false thought. Okay. Deduktif dan induktif berbagai metodologi. Okay. Logik ni adalah kaedah pemikiran yang benar. Berbagai jenis logik. So, you use deduktif dalam kepala otak. Kepala otak you. You deduct. Betul ke macam ni kan? So, penakulan ni macam you sit and you think about it. Kan? So, kita kena sempit logik dah prinsip-prinsip deduktif. So, kena bukti. Apa kalau yang sempit dia kena buktikan, kena demonstrate lah. Macam kalau belajar chemistry kan, A plus B dapat C. Itu very sempit lah. Tapi itu logik, itu still dalam logik. Okay. Teori permainan, dengan memainkan permainan tu, hujah-hujah didaksi bertujuan menimbulkan rasa yakin. So kalau kita dah proof kan, vaccine does not cause this bla 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 bla, adalah kan kita punya research. Lepas tu dah semua degree ni ini adalah fallacy yang tak rasional. Orang yang menolak tu adalah kita panggil orang yang tak rasional. Dia suka bagi ni sebab you boleh nampak kan. Kalau dia rasional, dia tak takut dia nak keluar sekarang. Letak dia dekat buat COVID. Okay. So, masuk kepada falsafah praktikal ataupun amali lah. So, ada akhlakiyah, iktisadiyah and siyasah. Akhlakiyah ni adalah kelakuan lah. How to be a good person kan. Iktisadiyah, perkara-perkara pentadbiran manusia mengenai diri, keluarga, masyarakat secara hidup. Okay. And then siyasat is politics. Sebab ni adalah ekonomi, akhlak ni, baik buruk, politik, kerajaan dan peradaban. Okay. Okay, falsafah praktikal boleh ditakdirkan sebagai kajian asas falsafah pemikiran praktikal. Okay. Dengan pendekatan pada nilai, sikap terhadap kehidupan dan norma tingkah laku. Praktikal bermaksud cara bersungguh-sungguh, tak terikat dengan tradisi, mempunyai ciri-ciri yang sistematik. So, basically, kajian asas falsafah lah. Maksudnya, how do you apply benda ni? Okay. And then, contoh subjek falsafah praktikal adalah etika, estetika, teori keputusan, falsafah politik. So, dia ada beberapa bidang yang boleh digunakan dalam falsafah moral. So, kita kena belajar. Tu dia akan belajar lagi dalam subjek etika dan moral. Etika dan peradaban kan. So, dia akan belajar lagi. Politik, falsafah politik, rationality, praktikal. Contohnya, politician kita macam ni problem ni. Tak, politician is like real politics. The end always justify the means, kan? Ni kita ada falsafah agama. Etika adalah perilaku. So, etika ni berbeza-beza, bergantung kepada di mana kita, dengan siapa kita, kan? Okay. So, dia pertama sekali dia dimulakan oleh Jeremy Bentham dan David Hume. Sebab dia bermula dengan dia kata keseronokan dan kebahagiaan ni nilai dia intrinsik internal. You feel internal, happy kan, ke dalam, bukan kat luar. Orang kita boleh senyum dan dalam masa sama hati kita tak happy. Boleh je. It happens before, okay? Okay. Tugas kita adalah berusaha melakukan perkara-perkara menambah jumlah kebahagiaan atau mengurangkan kesengsaraan dunia. So, kita bukan saja buat diri kita happy, untuk orang lain pun happy. Okay. Akhlak pula, dia kata seperti kata khuluk. Khuluk ni, akhlak sebagai sifat tertanam dalam jiwa. So, akhlak ni patut kita tahu, tak payah pertimbangan. Apa yang patut kita buat, kita tahu. Apa betul, apa salah, kita tahu. So, mazmumah, mahmudah. Okay. Confucianism pula, Jen, Li, Xin, Chung, Yi, Xiao ni semua ni, dia adalah kesetiaan terhadap negara, bersikap jujur, buat kebajikan, hormat, kan? Jainism adalah ajaran etika tunggal. Segala-galanya dalam dunia ni tak kekal. Dan tak payah nak cari keseronokan sebab dunia bukan tempat untuk berseronok. Lepas tu, Hinduism menggelarkan nafsu, Buddhism menyebut kedagaan, Trishna. Kedagaan ni macam ketamakan lah. Lepas tu Hindu bergelarkan karma, okay. Jainism merujuk kepada delusion, moha. Maksudnya kalau kita nak perfect hidup ni, it's not this life yang kita cari perfect. Sebab this life tak boleh bagi, dunia ni tak boleh bagi kita benda perfect dan kita happy. Okay, politik. So, politik, kita akan belajar The Prince Machiavelli. So, okay, pemberontakan dan serangan luar. The Prince matlamat menghasilkan cara tadi yang just told you, right? And then Islam, Farabi, peranan ketua negara menyamai jantung. It's the heart, okay? So, dia kena ada syarat-syarat tertentu. Dia kena fizikal baik, bertenaga, ada intelektual, mungkin cintai ilmu, apa semua tu. So, Marx pula, masyarakat sama. Semua orang kaya, tak ada orang kaya, tak ada orang miskin. So, manusia bebas dan berdaulat. So, dia macam ni. Kalau dia tak ada orang kaya sebab kekayaan tu dibahagikan sama rata. So, kalau seorang dapat 100,000, seorang lagi dapat 100 je tak boleh. So dia macam akan dibahagikan. Ekonomi pula berdasarkan ketuhanan. Karl Marx pula berdasarkan das kapital. Kita akan bincangkanlah apa itu das kapital kan. Macam mana masyarakat berubah semua tu dengan ekonomi. Okey, dalam das kapital, Karl Marx kata sisi negatif kapitalisme. Dia mengkritik ekonomi kapitalisme dan politik kapitalisme. Okey. Tapi dia sebenarnya ambil teori dia teori dia berkita bahawa masyarakat akan terus berubah dan dia kata perubahan masyarakat itu adalah tindak balas pada ekonomi. So kalau ekonomi macam ni, masyarakat macam ni. Macam sekarang juga mungkin tengok sekarang ni semua orang macam Makcik Johor pun pandai buat runner, pandai ada Facebook ke whatever it is, online platform, because online platform adalah satu keperluan kan dalam keadaan ni. Sebab ekonomi kita sekarang ni tiba-tiba you cannot interact dengan orang. Peradaban pula adalah nilai-nilai sejagat. So walau bagaimanapun masyarakat moden ni banyak mempunyai hikmah so maksudnya whatever you get from other daripada apa tu kita panggil falsafah peradaban terdahulu, kita banyak lupa dah, kita banyak tak ambil. Kalau dalam peradaban Islam, manusia yang holistik lah, hasanah dunia akhirat semua tu. So kalau dari pergi segi kita kadang ada konsep keimanan, kekuasaan, konsep kemanusiaan, ni semua it comes in the package kan. Seorang tu beriman, maksudnya kita beriman, kita seorang yang takut pada Allah. Lepas tu konsep kekuasaan adalah Allah ni hanya pencipta, kita ni pemegang kuasa, pemegang amanah. Dan konsep kemanusiaan adalah dalam Islam, manusia adalah makhluk. So ditanggungjawab. Jadi kita ada tanggungjawab pada makhluk lain. Makhluk tu tak kira lah binatang ke, manusia yang berbeza agama ke kan. Kita tak boleh go and kill people sesuka hati kita, tak boleh. Tamadun India pula dia jiwa. Dia fokus pada jiwa. Macam indera emosi, intelek hingga mencapai kesejaran suci. So kita fokus untuk membentuk semua tamadun-tamadun ni. Dia falsafah dia adalah untuk menjadi insan, jiwa tu clear conscience. Okay. Kemudian kita ada falsafah baru, falsafah teknologi ataupun technological studies. So apa kesan teknologi interaction manusia, kan? So technology relation to society. Contohnya macam some people they go out, they don't talk anymore, they talk on Facebook je, they talk on Twitter, on this kan. Apa efek dia? Menerima kemanusiaan melalui teknologi. So maksudnya itu dia. Falsafah teknologi bangunkan berkaitan teknologi itu sendiri. So merancang dan menunjukkan artifak. Maksudnya sistem buatan sifat benda tu dicipta. So kenapa? Why do we need to communicate like this? So sebab apa? Sebab kan teknologi dah buat macam ni. So we don't really need now to meet people. Macam now you still have class, kan? So falsafah di sebaliknya adalah sebab kita ada communication dengan teknologi. Perubahan falsafah teknologi. So apa yang berubah? So empirical turn from studying technology as a broad phenomenon to the actual technologies with detailed relation to sciences with human beings. So meaning sebelum ni dia study je teknologi tu apa, bagaimana semua kan. Sekarang ni impact dia pada human being. Okay. Falsafah organizational philosophy. Matlamat hala 7, visi, organisasi ni semua. Contohnya, apakah matlamat universiti? Mendidik student kan, takkan universiti ingin menghasilkan teknologi. Boleh jugalah, it depends on which department you are. Tapi macam the main is mendidik. Okay, so organisasi ni satu unit sosial lah. Semua manusia kat situ kan. Macam kita dekat universiti is a unit social unit. Birokrasi, paling berpengaruh adalah birokrasi. And then Proses birokrasi ni adalah pentadbiran lah. Pentadbiran akan decide sesuatu. Contohnya sekarang pentadbiran universiti cakap tak boleh ada kelas face to face. So we cannot do anything lah, we have to ni. Sejenis birokrasi ID termasuk tidak ada autoriti atau hubungan yang lain, tidak mempunyai persahabatan dan pemusuhan. So maksudnya what is a good administrative ataupun birokrasi ni adalah dia tak get personal. Okay. So dia terima yang beri arahan je. It's not personal. It's nothing personal. So dia memerlukan alat-alat pentadbiran lah, macam email and everything kan. So falsafah ekologi. So maksudnya masyarakat mesti manusia mesti berubah dia punya hubungan dengan alam semua jadi. So kita kena iktiraf yang alam semua jadi ni ada nilai. So ekologi manusia, trend sosial. Kita kutuk budak reva ke. And then kita kutuk ekologi manusia. That's human ecology. And then bagaimana pembangunan seimbang. So sebagai satu ideologi kontribusi, ekologi sosial membayangkan sebuah peralihan daripada ekonomi bergerak dari kekurangan ke arah dunia yang lebih harmoni. So it's not yet happening lah. Kita tak tahu lepas ni kot kan. Bokcin pula melihat manusia sebagai satu entiti punya kuasa untuk ubah dan manipulate lah ke persekitarannya. Contohnya kita tak nak guna plastic bag kan. So kita manipulate lah, kita tak nak guna plastic bag tu. Kita ada kekuatan sebagai manusia, kita tak ada isu kan untuk tak guna. Falsafah alam sekitar bermaksud macam mana manusia eksploitasi kebijaksanaan mereka. Okay. Hasilnya wujudlah pelbagai bidang cabang ilmu seperti matematik, fizik dan semua ni lah. So itu saja. Habis dah lecture 2 ni. I hope you understand. Please read the notes. Please do the exercise I give you. Tolong read notes notes ni saya akan sertakan nantilah. Saya akan upload sekali. So that's all for today. Nanti I see you after Raya. Selamat Hari Raya everyone who is celebrating. Yang lain tu, happy holidays.
Hi, my name is Monty Johnson. I'm a professor at the University of California, San Diego, and today I want to talk about the purpose of human life, Aristotle's ergon argument. The word ergon in Greek means work or job or product or function. The term is most clearly used in the context of artifacts or skills. So the ergon of a saw is to cut, the ergon of a house is to protect against weather and intruders, and the ergon of an architect is to build houses. A connected term is arity, which means excellence or virtue. The excellence of a saw is sharpness, since its function is to cut. The excellence of a house is stability and security, since its function is protection. And the excellence of an architect is the building of good houses. Do human beings have an ergon or a function? And if so, do they also have a corresponding arity or excellence? Aristotle argues that they do, and his argument can help us think more clearly about the purpose of human life. But before we can discuss the ergon argument itself, we need to discuss some background assumptions about the nature of life. Aristotle recognizes 4 distinct classes of living things: plants, animals, humans, and gods. We'll set gods aside for a moment here. Aristotle defines living things by their capabilities. Plants have the ability to grow, use energy, and reproduce. When we talk about a plant doing well or poorly, we refer to these capabilities. Thus, when a plant is growing properly, deepening its roots, throwing out leaves and flowers and shoots, and fructifying, we say that it is flourishing. The opposite happens when a plant's capabilities are stymied, when a tree, for instance, is stunted or leaves are withering and dying on the vine. Botanists and gardeners know what is good or bad for plants, that is, what kinds of things help and what kinds of things hurt the activities related to their capabilities. Notice that it is not a matter of opinion, but of scientific fact what is good and bad for plants in this respect. Different plants might require different kinds of nutrients or different amounts of shade and water, but every plant is said to do well or poorly on the objective basis of the activities related to its specific capabilities. Animals, in a way, are like superpowered plants. They, too, have the ability to grow, use nutrition, and reproduce. These things are just as objectively important for animals as they are for plants, as veterinarians and zoologists can tell you. But animals also have other and higher capabilities. For example, animals, unlike plants, can move themselves around in space. Animals that cannot do so, whether because of a birth defect or because they're encaged, cannot be said to be doing well. This is why animal rights activists campaign for larger cages or free ranges for animals, because it's obvious that it is better for the animals if they are capable of exercising their capacity for self-movement fully. Most importantly, animals have the capability of perception. They can feel hot and cold, smell, taste, hear, and see, and some of them can do all of these things. Animals that are incapable of seeing, even though members of their species are normally able to do so, are thought not to be doing as well as their relatives that can. With the ability to sense comes the ability to feel pain and pleasure and thus appetite and aversion. These capabilities are connected with an animal's capability for self-movement, since they pursue that which they have an appetite for and avoid things that might interfere with their natural activities. Now, an animal cannot do well if it is deficient with respect to its plant-like or vegetative capabilities, but even if it is fine with respect to those capabilities, it cannot be said to flourish if it is stymied with respect to self-movement and sensation. For example, if an animal is in a lot of pain or is unable to satisfy its desire for food because of injury to its organs of movement, that animal will not be said to do well. For an animal to flourish, it needs to be able to move around and to sense the world in such a way that produces for it pleasure, or at least more pleasure than pain. Now let's move on to humans. It's often pointed out that humans are animals with superpowers, but it is less often pointed out that we are plants too. That is, we, like other animals, have the capabilities of plants: growth, nutrition, and reproduction. And we need to exercise these capabilities if we are to live. And like the other animals, we have the capabilities for self-movement and sensation, and with these pleasure and pain, appetite and aversion. All life is deeply connected in this way. But humans also have unique capabilities that no other animals have, most importantly the ability to reason and to use language. These capabilities allow us to cultivate friendships and social relations, build and contribute to political structures, plan for the future, modify our appetites and desires, educate our young, develop music and mathematics, and even to contemplate the nature of the universe and the purpose of human life. If a human does not have these capabilities, they are missing out on part of what it is to be human, and if they also lack even the animal capabilities, we might consider them less than animal, at least while they're in what we, for these very reasons, call a persistent vegetative state. Thus, we can determine what is good for us in a parallel fashion to how we determine what is good with respect to the other kinds of living things. Those things that allow us to engage in the activities that exercise our capacities are good, and those that impede or prevent this are bad. Now that we have that background in place, we should be in a good position to answer what for Aristotle is the ergon of a human being. It would be odd if the purpose of human life was related to our lowest vegetative capabilities, unless we aspire to being a good plant. Thus, the exercise of our capabilities for reproduction, growth and stature, and even nutrition, however important for us, cannot be the ultimate purpose of our life, any more than it could be for a brute animal. Similarly, mere sensation, pleasure, and satisfaction of our bodily appetites cannot, as they are for brute animals, be the purpose of our life. What makes cows and pigs flourish can no more make a human flourish than what makes oaks and vine flourish can do so for cows and pigs, even if those lower vegetative capabilities must be in a satisfactory condition in order for the higher ones to do their work. Thus, by a process of elimination, we arrive at the capabilities to use reason and language. These are the capabilities that define us, which is why Aristotle defined the human being as a rational animal, which is reflected in the modern name for our species, Homo sapiens. Thus, the forming of friendships and social relations, the controlling of our appetites and emotions, the cultivation of moral and intellectual virtues, and the observing of the cosmos and our place in it are the activities that, because they correspond with our highest and most unique capabilities, give meaning to human life and represent the flourishing of our kind of living thing. The things that are good for us follow from this, and thus can be determined with the same degree of objectivity that gardeners and botanists can for plants, and veterinarians and zoologists can for animals. These arts and sciences can objectively determine what is good and bad for those kind of living things, and so anthropology and philosophy can determine what is good and bad for our kind of living thing. In fact, the very highest activity, the one that Aristotle calls godlike, is philosophy, because this involves the pure exercise of reason and thought, just as the gods constantly engage in, according to Aristotle. And philosophy engages in reason and thought not only in order to serve our vegetative and animal needs, but just for its own sake as well, for the sake of living a human life. For this reason, Aristotle thought that doing philosophy was the ultimate end of human existence. In conclusion, you should be happy that you're watching this video, because I have just shown how you are now engaging in the exercise of your highest and most godlike capabilities. Good work.
It's your funeral. No, actually, you're dead. Your loved ones are all sitting around reminiscing about your life. What are they saying? How will you be remembered? Did you have a good life? How would we know? What constitutes a good life? The first thing to consider is whether the value of a life is determined by the liver of that life or by other people. What if your last thought before you died was that you had had a perfect life, but when your loved ones sit around and discuss it, they all decide that your life was kinda awful? Is that possible? Could they be right about your life and you be wrong? Or run it the other way. What if everyone else thinks your life was amazing, but you die miserable feeling your life was a total waste? Who's right? And which of these two options would you prefer? We have reached the end of Crash Course Philosophy, and it's time to examine your own life. And that means asking yourself some big questions, like, are you living the way you think you should? Are you working toward goals you actually care about? How important are these things to you? Right now, the choices you make, the way you spend your time, these things are shaping the type of life you'll lead. So think about what matters, because as Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. The 20th century French philosopher Albert Camus recounted the ancient Greek myth of Sisyphus. You've probably heard of it. Due to various transgressions he'd committed, Sisyphus was condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a mountain. And when he reached the top, the boulder would roll back down, and then Sisyphus would have to start all over again. This was the entirety of his existence. He couldn't do anything else. It was just up and down the hill in a never-ending cycle. And you know what Camus said about that? He said, "We must imagine Sisyphus happy." Really? Happy? Well, Camus was an existentialist, and he thought that each one of us basically is Sisyphus. Nothing that any of us does is inherently important, because stuff just doesn't have any inherent meaning. We're all just rolling boulders up hills. But we can choose to give meaning to what we do. After all, we decide what to value, so when we throw ourselves into a task, it becomes filled with meaning. Meaning we give to it. Some people find this story of Sisyphus to be really depressing, because on the one hand, it's kind of saying that nothing you do matters. But on the other hand, it's saying that anything you do matters, provided you choose to imbue it with value. Become a doctor and save lives, be a stay-at-home parent and create a beautiful childhood for your kids, be an amazing best friend. Find a career that gives you the space in your life to pursue a hobby you adore. Volunteer your time promoting a cause you care about. Put your energy into amassing a great deal of wealth. Become a champion Scrabble player. Feed squirrels. It doesn't matter what you do. What matters is that it's meaning-making for you. The existentialist message is that your life is in your hands. You and only you have the power to make your life great, and only you can evaluate its greatness. Contemporary American philosopher Joanne Chula encourages you to think about the philosophy of your work. She reminds us that for most of your life, you're going to spend spend more of your waking hours at work than anywhere else. So find a job you love. If you don't love it, find a different one, even if it has less status. The highest paying job is not always the best job. Basically, existentialists tell us that our lives are in our hands, so if you're unhappy, change it. Now let's head over to the thought bubble for our final flash philosophy. 20th century American philosopher Robert Nozick asked us to imagine that scientists had developed the ultimate innovation in virtual reality, known as the experience machine. This machine allows you to have any experience you like for as long as you like, an hour, a day, 2 years, even the rest of your life if you want. Your body will rest comfortably in a bed tended by scientists and nourished through feeding tubes. Meanwhile, your mind will experience the best your imagination has to offer. You can achieve fame and fortune, cure cancer, climb mountains, date Beyonce, whatever you choose. And the simulation is so complete that while you're in the machine, you'll be convinced that these experiences are really happening. It will feel as real as the experiences you're having right now. There will be no way to tell it's a simulation. Now, Nozick had no interest in entering such a machine, and he thought that most of us wouldn't either, because the experiences it gives us don't correspond with reality. Even though you might feel like you're having meaningful relationships in the machine, in the actual world those people would be out living their own lives without you while you're laying in bed having simulated experiences of being with them. And if having an actual impact on the real world is important to you, well, that's one thing the experience machine wouldn't be able to give you. However, if you're a hedonist, that is, a person who believes the good is equal to the pleasurable, then simply having whatever experiences you desire is what you're after. So it might be hard to see why you shouldn't take the old experience machine for a spin. After all, it could let you experience things you could never have otherwise. So, what do you say? You want to go in there? Thanks, Thought Bubble. Now, of course, the ancient Greeks had their own ideas about what a good life was. Socrates cautioned the people of Athens to avoid complacency. He said you should be critical of your own life. Don't wait for someone to come along and save you. Save yourself. And if this study of philosophy has taught you anything, it's that things are not always as they seem, and great good can come from looking deeper, challenging the status quo, and being willing to question everything, including how you live. Remember eudaimonia? Back when we talked about Aristotle and virtue theory, I brought this up. It describes a life of flourishing, a life in which a person is constantly striving for self-improvement, to be more virtuous, more wise, more thoughtful, and self-aware. Better. This was Aristotle's idea of a life well lived. He wouldn't agree with Camus that we all get to make our own meaning and that there are infinite ways to live a good life, and he certainly wouldn't endorse the use of the experience machine. Aristotle believed in a human essence, that there's a proper way to be a human being, and that we'll only flourish by finding that path. Aristotle said humans are the rational animal, so living a good human life means seeking to know. Know your world, know yourself, and strive to govern yourself through reason. Work to be the best, most virtuous version of yourself. Underachievers, in this view, cannot live good lives. Aristotle also believed that some ways of living are definitely better or worse than others, so if you want to be a good human, what you prefer has nothing to do with it. Choosing to be a couch potato or to indulge one's pleasures, he said, is to live a not good life. This stands in stark contrast to the picture we get from Camus, who said that we are all the determiners of the value of our own lives. So a guy from ancient Greece and a guy from 20th century France are sending you conflicting signals. What does that tell us? Well, in our very first episode, we talked about how philosophers are still grappling with many of the same questions that were first posed 2,500 years ago. And now, 46 episodes later, you can see that they are still disagreeing with each other. But at this point, hopefully you see that all of the questioning and disagreeing isn't some character flaw that all philosophers have. It in itself is a deliberate, chosen way to live, no matter what kind of philosophy they prefer. Some philosophers are theists and others are atheists. They're dualists and materialists, utilitarians and Kantians, libertarians and determinists. Some devote their lives to studying philosophy and teaching it to others, but there are also plenty of lay philosophers out there with different careers who practice philosophy every day, not as a paying profession, but simply as a way of living whatever life they have chosen. You can see the philosopher in authors like Douglas Adams and Terry Pratchett, in the movies of Christopher Nolan and the Wachowskis, in the humor of George Carlin and Margaret Cho, and many other entertainers. But people who practice philosophy are also simply people who ask why why, who are willing to challenge something that doesn't seem right, to listen to other people's opinions, and to be ever ready to accept new truths if the evidence is there. These are parents who talk with their kids about why they have to do things rather than just issuing edicts, who even let their children have a hand in decision-making when appropriate. These are enlightened employers and mindful workers. Philosophers actually make good bosses and they make good employees in whatever profession they choose, because philosophy teaches you to be creative, flexible, and holistic in your vision and thinking. To live as a philosopher means to never stop questioning and to never stop striving for truth, to continue working to live better, to know more, and to revise your position based on new evidence. Philosophers are convinced that this is the best way to live a good life. Today, we talked about what it means to live a good life. We learned about the myth of Sisyphus and Robert Nozick's experience machine, and discussed Aristotle's eudaimonistic picture of a good human life, as well as the existentialist's view that we each determine the value of our own lives. Crash Course Philosophy is produced in association with PBS Digital Studios. You can head over to their channel and check out a playlist of the latest episodes from shows like The Art Assignment, Braincraft, and PBS Infinite series. This episode of Crash Course was filmed in the Dr. Cheryl C. Kinney Crash Course studio with the help of all of these awesome people, and our equally fantastic graphics team is Thought Cafe.
Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace. Share your passion with the world.
Let's say, for the sake of argument, that you love your father, by which I mean you want him to be alive. And let's also assume that you don't have any attachments to your mother that you might describe as romantic. Well, guess who thought he felt the same way about his parents? Oedipus. According to ancient Greek legend, when Oedipus was born, a prophecy foretold that he would kill his father and marry his mother. So, in an act of colossally bad decision-making, his father left baby Oedipus in the wilderness, assuming he would die, and the prophecy would then not come true. But instead, the abandoned baby was discovered and raised by another family. As an adult, Oedipus learned of the prophecy that he would kill his father and marry his mother. So, not knowing he was adopted, he left his adoptive parents in order to avoid fulfilling that prophecy, figuring that if he wasn't near them, it couldn't come true. Lo and behold, as he was trying to flee his fate, Oedipus killed a stranger in a fit of rage who turned out to be the father he had never met. He then proceeded to marry the dead man's widow, who was actually his mother, though he didn't know it. Needless to say, this is a fate that any of us would like to avoid. But for philosophers, the whole point of the story of Oedipus is there is no escaping fate. Are we free? I mean, on the one hand, most of us have the clear sense that we are. We feel free. We feel like we make all sorts of decisions that lead to both beliefs and actions that are wholly of our own choosing, like, I could do that. I had oatmeal this morning because I felt like it. This view that humans are capable of entirely free actions is known as libertarian free will. And to be clear, libertarian free will is nothing like political libertarianism. Both views get their name from the word liberty, but political libertarians are all about freedom from government intervention, while people who accept libertarian free will could be anything from political libertarians to socialists. They just think that metaphysically we can act freely. So a lot of us figure that our thoughts and actions are free, but most of us also believe that every effect has a cause, and that everything that happens now in the present is the necessary result of events that occurred in the past. This view is known as hard determinism, and many of the people watching this probably think that they believe in both things, that many of your actions are free, and that the world is governed by cause and effect. But it turns out, you can't rationally hold both views, because traditionally libertarians have defined free actions according to what's known as the principle of alternate possibilities. That might sound like a plot device for a sci-fi show, but this principle says that an action is free only if the agent, that is the person doing the thing, could have done otherwise. So truly free actions require options. Determinism, by contrast, doesn't allow options. It holds that every event is caused by a previous event, which means that an agent can never have done anything other than what they did, and therefore they are never free. But let's look at these two options more closely, and also let's look at my breakfast. Libertarianism says that my decision decision to eat oatmeal this morning wasn't necessarily caused by anything that happened before it. Instead, it could have been the result of non-physical events, specifically my own thoughts that originated right at that point. I ate oatmeal because I decided to eat oatmeal. End of story. But libertarianism runs counter to what we know about the workings of the physical world, with one thing causing another. So libertarians need a way to account for their view. One way they do that is by making a distinction between what's known as event causation and agent causation. Event causation means that no physical event can occur without having been caused by a previous physical event. So many libertarians concede that the physical world itself is deterministic, like a baseball is flying through the air because someone hit that ball with a bat. But many libertarians also argue that there's such a thing as agent causation, which says that an agent, a being propelled by a mind, can start a whole chain of causality that wasn't caused by anything else. So the person who hit the ball most likely did so because they just decided to do it. By this logic, agents have the ability to affect the causal chain of the universe. They can make stuff happen on their own. But many philosophers find this idea untenable. Where would these free decisions, the ones that launch entirely new causal chains, come from, they ask? Are they simply random? What would compel an agent to make one decision and not another? And if you can answer those questions, if you can explain what would cause an agent to act, then, well, you've just reinforced the position that actions are caused rather than free. The fact is, it's pretty difficult to find arguments that support libertarian free will. The best argument in favor of it seems to be that it just feels an awful lot like we're free. And libertarians argue that we shouldn't discount the legitimacy of our own personal subjective experiences. So if we feel so free, we should seriously consider the possibility that we are. That point has a certain intuitive appeal, but if you can't come up with an argument to defend your feeling, then good philosophical reasoning recommends that you reject it, or at least withhold judgment until you can get some evidence together. So now, let's see if the hard determinists can do any better. 18th century French philosopher Baron d'Holbach said that none of our actions are actually free. D'Holbach believed that everything that's happening right now is the result of an unbroken chain of events. Everything, he said, is the inevitable result of what came before, including everything that we do. Our actions are caused in the same way that, say, home runs are caused by bats hitting balls, or tornadoes are caused by warm air systems hitting cool air systems in the right conditions. This means that humans and our actions are just part of the physical world, bound by its physical laws. This belief is often explained through a view known as reductionism. Reductionism is the view that all parts of the world and of our own experience can be traced back or reduced down to one singular thing. So, for example, you see your mind as being capable of making free decisions. You think that what goes on in your head when you make a choice is not at all like bats and balls. But, well, mental states are brain states, or at least they're directly tied to your brain, and brain states are biological. And biological states are physical states. And the physical world, as we already said, is deterministic. There's just no room for free will in this picture. We think we're free, but we're not. And really, as scientific thinkers, why would we assume that we are? Why would we think that we're any different than everything else in the universe? What would make us so special? Libertarians are right that it's really hard to disregard the feeling of freedom. If I didn't choose to eat oatmeal this morning, why do I feel like I did? And what made me do it? But hard determinists say that the difference between the causes of human actions and the causes of physical events, like a bat hitting a ball, is that our actions have all sorts of invisible causes that happen in our brains. Specifically, when beliefs team up with our desires and our temperament, they say, you get a deliberate human action. Combine my belief that oatmeal is nutritious with my desire for healthy nourishment and the temperament that predisposes me to enjoy warm, carby comfort foods, and ta-da! You get oatmeal-y breakfast. Now, you might argue that those particular beliefs, desires, and temperaments might lead to any number of breakfast choices, cream of wheat maybe, or some granola. But if you dig deep enough, you'd find that there are factors that rule out those options, as well as every other option. Maybe I'm a little worried one of my fillings is coming loose, so I'm shying away from granola because it's too crunchy. Or I just don't think about cream of wheat very often. I mean, they don't have very good brand awareness anymore. What even is cream of wheat exactly? And the oatmeal is sitting right there in front of me. Or maybe I briefly think of making one of those quinoa breakfast bowls that are so hip right now, but my lazy temperament or my belief that I'm running late pushes me to choose the 90 seconds in the microwave option. See how it works? All you have to do is change one factor, a belief, a desire, or temperament, and you get a different outcome. Hard determinists argue that just because we can't pinpoint the exact factors that led us to an action, we could, in theory, isolate them if we knew enough about all of the beliefs, desires, and temperaments swirling around in our brains. So in this view, what we call decisions are really just the inevitable results of a bunch of mental stuff stuff combining in just the right way. And maybe it feels free, but it's not. But hold up, isn't there some way out of this? Like, what if I have someone choose my breakfast for me? Or what if I fall back on randomness by, like, flipping a coin? After all, if I just flipped a coin, then it wouldn't look like that decision was made by beliefs, desires, and temperaments. But, well, no such luck, because even if I thought I chose randomly, my decision to flip the coin, or who I asked to pick for me, was just as determined as everything else. And guess what? If you're getting angry right now about me telling you that none of your choices are free, well, that anger was determined. If you're finding this whole topic confusing or boring, yup, still determined. You think you can freely choose to stop playing this video, but if you're still watching me, good news, that's determined too. Determinists believe that you can't help but feel and react the way you're reacting right now. You can think you're choosing to act in ways that conform to the character that you've selected and shaped for yourself, but even that choice is the result of all sorts of already determined factors about you and your place in the world. Hard determinism is tough to refute, and it has some really uncomfortable implications. It means the deeply held feeling most of us have that we actually make free decisions is just wrong. And the whole concept of personal responsibility is thrown out the window too. As Dolbach put it, we're all just cogs in a machine doing what we were always meant to do with no actual volition. Oedipus had to kill his dad and marry his mom. I had to eat oatmeal. And you just had to keep watching. You couldn't turn away. Today, we learned about libertarian free will and its counterpoint, hard determinism. Next time, we'll see if some middle ground can be found between determinism and libertarianism, and I sure hope there can be. Today's episode of Crash Course Philosophy was inevitably made possible by Squarespace. Squarespace is a way to create a website, blog, or online store for you and your ideas. Squarespace features a user-friendly interface, custom templates, and 24/7 customer support. Try Squarespace at squarespace.com/Crash Course for a special offer. Squarespace, share your passion with the world. Crash Course Philosophy is produced in association with PBS Digital Studios. You can head over to their channel and check out a playlist of the latest episodes from shows like Coma Nitty, Deep Look, and First Person. This episode of Crash Course was filmed in the Dr. Cheryl C. Kinney Crash Course studio with the help of all these awesome people, and our equally fantastic graphics team is Thought Cafe.
Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace, share your passion with the world.
At a museum in Denmark in 2000, artist Marco Everesti debuted a work of art that involved live goldfish swimming around in vessels full of water. Sounds pretty boring until I tell you that those vessels were electric blenders. Everesti named his display Helena, and he invited museum patrons to turn on the blenders if they so desired. Eventually, at least one person so desired, fish were blended, and before long, police arrived ordering that the blenders be unplugged. The museum was charged with animal cruelty, although the charges were later dropped. For his part, Everesti said that his work was designed to sort people into 3 categories. If you want to push the button, he said, you're a sadist. If the exhibit makes you feel upset, you're a moralist. And if you enjoy watching the reactions of others, you're a voyeur. But many people argued that Everesti's goldfish blenders weren't art at all. You probably have your own opinions about that. But no matter what you think, works like Everesti's raise a lot of questions about art and morality and what standards we should use to evaluate art. And from there, new questions follow, like what does art tell us about ourselves? What does it do to us, and what purpose does art serve in our lives? You know who was super anti-art? Plato. He believed that art plays to our emotions rather than to our reason, and if you recall Plato's idea of the tripartite soul, he thought the rational part of the soul should always be in charge. So art was problematic for him because it encourages us to think with the spirited or emotional part of our souls. He also had a beef with art because he said it depicts the imaginary as if it were real, and for a guy who was as concerned with truth as he was, you can see why this might have been a problem. Plato was so concerned about the dangers of art that he actually advocated for its widespread censorship. And while you might disagree with him on that, you can probably at least agree with his sentiment that art is powerful. But what is it good for? Well, let's fast forward about 2,400 years for that. 20th century British philosopher R.G. Collingwood acknowledged that art is frequently used as an escape from life, a simple amusement, a distraction. But he also said that the best art, the art that really matters, is the stuff that changes the way we interact with the world. So Collingwood drew a distinction between what he called amusement art and magic art. Amusement art helps the audience escape from reality, he said, diving into a no-stakes fictional world after a stressful day. But magic art is the stuff that helps the audience learn how better to interact with this world's reality. A great example of this is Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel Uncle Tom's Cabin. Beecher Stowe's story helped change our national mindset about slavery by making white readers see African Americans as human beings with whom they had a lot in common, rather than as a nameless other who should be thought of as property. Collingwood felt we should spend our time on magic art like that, the stuff that helps us live better rather than simply running away from the world. But some people feel that this distinction breaks down pretty quickly. A book or movie that could be little more than an amusing escape for one person could spur another person to change their lives for the better. Think about your favorite fandom. Like, for some people, Harry Potter is pure escapism, a way to disappear into a fantasy where your troubles can be addressed with the flick of a wand. But for others, Harry Potter can help you learn how to live. Lessons on the value of friendship, teamwork, loyalty, and stick-with-itness can be found among the Horcruxes and Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. So art can help you be moral, or maybe even encourage immorality, but there are plenty of other ways in which morality can intersect with art, like in nasty, legal, copyrighty ways. For more on this, let's head to the thought bubble for some flash philosophy. In 2011, wildlife photographer David Slater was on a photo shoot in Indonesia when a monkey named Naruto got a hold of his camera. There are disputes as to how exactly, but in the process, that monkey took some pretty sweet selfies. Slater later tried to claim copyright of the images, but was denied because he was not the one who took the pictures. Naruto did. The photos are currently in the public domain, but the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals has filed a lawsuit on behalf of Naruto, arguing that the monkey owns the rights and any profits ought to go to him. Slater, on the other hand, says that he should own the rights because he was ultimately responsible for Naruto getting his camera and taking the pictures with it. By that logic, Slater claims, he was the artist and Naruto was simply part of the medium used to create the art. Slater's reasoning might resonate with those of you who, in our last episode, were in the camp that believed art required an intentional artist. In that view, Naruto can't claim the pics because he probably didn't understand himself as deliberately taking self-portraits. But arguably, Slater's intention didn't shape the pictures either. He didn't decide how to position the camera or when to click the shutter. But he did decide to go to that particular location knowing it was full of curious little primates with opposable thumbs that would make working a camera possible. So what do you think? Is there any artist behind these pictures? And if there is, who is it? Maybe it's a collaboration and Slater and Naruto should split the profit. I bet one of them would be willing to take his cut in chom-choms. Thanks, Thought Bubble. One of the first people to really consider the philosophical questions of art was Aristotle. Unlike his teacher Plato, Aristotle was generally pro-art because he saw it as useful. He believed our bodies need to experience a full range of emotions in order to stay in balance. He argued that if we haven't been sad in a while or had a good adrenaline rush, we can start to crave those feelings. And when we don't or can't experience the full range of emotions in our actual lives, art can step in and do the job for us. When we finally do experience these sensations we've been yearning for, we feel a pleasurable release that Aristotle called catharsis. And while John has often insisted that Aristotle was spectacularly wrong about everything, Aristotle's theory of catharsis does do a beautiful job of resolving a little conundrum in aesthetics that's known as the problem of tragedy. This is the weird puzzle of why people voluntarily walk into a theater clutching a box of tissues, fully prepared to bawl their eyes out for 2 hours, having paid for the privilege. I mean, really, why is the tearjerker even a thing? According to Aristotle, catharsis. A scary movie or a tearjerker can allow us to express strong negative emotions in a safe context, and the emotional purge that comes with the experience feels really, really good. No doubt, when it comes to evoking emotions in us, art can be extremely effective. But how does it manage to do that? Why is art so good at making us feel? When you think about it, it's actually pretty weird that we get so emotionally invested in characters that we know to be fictional. Why do we cry real tears of the deaths of our beloved characters? Why do we invest time and energy in shipping? These questions fall under another problem that art poses for us, one that aestheticians call the paradox of fiction. Contemporary American philosopher Kendall Walton explains why we can be moved by things that aren't real by arguing that the emotional responses we have to fictional events aren't real either. Instead, he says, we experience what he calls quasi-emotions, basically emotion-like responses that can be triggered by fiction, but don't exist or function on the level of true emotions. Now, as evidence for this, Walton points out that people don't respond to scary movies as they would to real-life terror. Like, when we're watching a scary movie, we don't run out of the theater and call 911 like we would if we saw a real person in danger. But other thinkers, like American philosopher Noel Carroll, disagree. Carroll argues that we can have real emotional responses to fictional characters and situations. Our emotions don't have to correspond to external reality in order for the emotions themselves to be real, he says. So we can feel just as strongly for the loves and losses of our favorite characters as we can for the plights of our friends and family. Now, it's time to think back to Helena and the goldfish in the blenders. Helena raises questions about the relationship between morality and art, and here there are two main schools of thought. Some people, called autonomists, maintain that art and morality are entirely separate. So if something is done in the name of art, it's basically immune from moral scrutiny. It's almost like artists live and work in some kind of protective morality bubble. So in the autonomous view, Évariste did nothing wrong putting goldfish in a situation where they were likely to be pulverized because he was doing it in the name of artistic expression. But there are others, known as aesthetic moralists, who argue that morality and art are interconnected. So any moral stain connected with a work makes a work aesthetically flawed. In this view, even if Évariste's aesthetic concept was superb, the fact that he expressed that concept through immoral means, in this case the wanton destruction of goldfish life, that counts against the overall aesthetic value of his work. Art is often designed to challenge our beliefs and our values, and most of us agree that this can be a good thing. But are there limits? We often give artists credit for amazing works of art that inspire positive change in the world, like Uncle Tom's Cabin. But if a work inspires bad actions or bad attitudes, is the artist to blame for that too? As in most areas of philosophy, there's plenty more about aesthetics that we could explore if we had time. But as we move on to the next segment of our course, I hope you've found that aesthetics, one of the less well-known areas of philosophy, is worth your attention as you continue to interact with art in your lives. Today, we learned about R.G. Collingwood's view that art is best when it helps us live better lives. We learned how Aristotle's concept of catharsis can resolve the problem of tragedy, and we studied the paradox of fiction. We also thought about the debate between autonomism and moralism. This episode of Crash Course Philosophy is made possible by Squarespace. Squarespace is a way to create a website, blog, or online store for you and your ideas. Squarespace features a user-friendly interface, custom templates, and 24/7 customer support. Try Squarespace at squarespace.com/crashcourse for a special offer. Squarespace, share your passion with the world. Crash Course Philosophy is produced in association with PBS Digital Studios. You can head over to their channel to check out a playlist of the latest episodes of shows like Gross Science, PBS Idea Channel, and It's Okay to Be Smart. This episode of Crash Course was filmed in the Dr. Cheryl C. Kinney Crash Course studio with the help of all of these awesome people, and our equally fantastic graphics team is Thought Cafe.